With me now is Hans Blix, the chairman of the Weapons of Mass Destruction Commission and also the former Director General of the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency. Thank you very much for joining us today. Now, let's start with North Korea. There's been talks in Beijing, and China has said that it's drafted a new paper that it hopes to find out exactly what progress North Korea has made in disarmament, its nuclear disarmament. How effective do you think this document is likely to be?
Well, there's been a long discussion about verification. The North Koreans have submitted a declaration of their nuclear inventory and of the equipment and installations they have. And I think they declared something like 35 kilograms of plutonium, and the United States estimated that there ought to be a little more. I don't think that they can ever come to absolute certainty what is the truth here. The U.S. calculations are based upon the time that they have seen that the reactor has been off and that they could have used the reprocessing plant. So in the end, the result will probably be some sort of taking care of the plutonium that they have declared, and there will be an uncertainty as to whether something will remain. And my impression is that the U.S. and the world will live with that uncertainty. That can still perhaps be quantities of plutonium enough for one bomb or for two bombs. But the main thing is then that the capability, the installations, the reprocessing plant will no longer be there, so they cannot produce more.
North Korea has said that it's refusing Japan to be involved in the discussions, and that it's also not allowing full access to its nuclear program as agreed in a US deal. What do you think is the best approach then to deal with North Korea and encourage it to disarm?
The Japanese question is a little specific, because that has to do with Japanese citizens who were kidnapped in a horrible manner in the past. And whether one can solve that issue together with the nuclear issue, I think is a bit doubtful. So Japan, I understand, has not been willing to deliver oil. But if Japan is not willing to do it because of this hurdle, then maybe oil can be delivered from somewhere else.
Now, obviously, Iran is another nuclear state at the focus of attention. How much danger do you think Iran is to the rest of the world at the moment?
Well, at this moment, I don't think it poses a danger, but they do have a capability to enrich uranium on an industrial scale. And when they have that, well, there's not much time left before they could make a bomb if they want. Of course, they deny that they have that intention. But others say that we don't want you to have enrichment capability at all, because you might change your mind one day. Maybe you don't have the intention today, and they suspect they have the intention, but maybe they don't. And even if they have not, then they could change the intention. So the safest, that which would lead to least tension in the Middle East would be if they refrain from any enrichment in Iran. But to do that, certainly there will be a need to a lot of compensation. If they want to forego, if they are to forego the option to make nuclear weapons, maybe they need guarantees that they will not be attacked. They don't need to worry about Iraq any longer, or they don't worry about Pakistan or Turkey, but they may need such a guarantee from the United States. They have been isolated from the United States since 1979, when they invaded the U.S. Embassy. And maybe they will say that, well, if we are to abstain from this, we think that the least you can do is that you establish diplomatic relations with us, so that we'll stop this isolation. These two things have not been offered so far, and there may be other things that might make it possible for them to accept doing away with enrichment. But one doesn't know. One will not know until one engages in negotiations directly with them.
And the US President-elect Barack Obama has said that perhaps there's a new policy to be taken by the United States which involves tighter sanctions and more economic incentives. Do you think that's likely to work?
Well, I think that both rewards and, if you want, punishments, the sanctions, economic restrictions, that's a kind of punishment, the pressure on them, that if you do not want our solution, then you will have less favorable economic conditions. That's one way. But it's important that there also be rewards, as in the form of saying we will now invest, there will be investments, we will not put any obstacles to that. We might help you in your nuclear program, we'll help you to get into the World Trade Organization. There need to be both of these. But I think that if they go to threaten use of force, then it may be counterproductive. This is what they've done, because if they threaten use of armed force, first of all, it's humiliating. Iran will say that you are threatening us. And secondly, the answer may be, well, we are threatened, so we better have that nuclear weapon, which you don't want us to have.
And what role does Russia play in all this in helping further negotiations?
I think Russia is a very delicate position, because certainly Russia does not want Iran to have any nuclear weapon, and also no enrichment. That is clear. You are the neighbor. You are close by. At the same time, you have trade relations, and you need to live next to each other in the future. We can see it on the Bushehr plant, which the Russians have helped to complete. And Russia also promised to deliver fuel. Now, at one point you could hear voices in the United States say, well, threaten them not to deliver any fuel unless they stop enrichment. But if the Russia had heeded that advice, if they had said that, okay, we won't give you any fuel unless you stop, then the Iranians would say, there you are. You are no reliable supplier. You have a contract that you have promised us to supply, so we can't trust you. That shows that we need our own enrichment. And in fact, Russia, I think, has chosen the way that they will deliver fuel. And in fact, I think the United States has also been wise to say that they have to do that. This, after all, is fuel for a light water reactor, and they are not very risky from the point of view of proliferation.
Now, the US says its planned missile defence system in Eastern Europe is aimed at preventing any attacks from these so-called rogue states like Iran. Do you think that's a legitimate cause for concern?
Well, the United States is free, and the countries in question are also free to accept whatever they wish, but I don't think it's wise. I think it is very, very unwise. Firstly, I think that if one were really worried about rogue states, then one should do it together. The U.S. should do it together with Russia and the Europeans and the Chinese. And the Russians, I think, are not saying that this threatens our second strike capability. No. They know that they can get through. But that's today. They might worry that in the future these things might develop into something. And I think they feel it's also a bit indelicate of the United States to put something so close to Russian borders. And I think that if the Russians were doing something in Cuba, I think the Americans would understand that. So I think it is unwise, and I hear also in Europe I see no enthusiasm at all for this scheme. And I think it would be wise if they somehow got out of the prestige fight that it is now. There was one point Mr. Putin proposed that they should have something jointly in Azerbaijan, and I think some such compromise ought to be found so that neither will lose face. But it was not a good thing to start in the first place by the United States.
Russia has said that it sees it as quite provocative as a threat to its national security, and might itself actually increase its missile defence as well. So in this sort of light, could this perhaps have an opposite effect and actually lead to an increase in arms and perhaps a new arms race?
Of course, it is an element in the chill that we have between the United States and Russia, which there are other elements in as well. The arms military expenses today in the world are about 1,300 billion, and half of that is the United States. About 5% is the UK, and Russia is only at 3%. Now, $1,300 billion a year is something that the world could use better for the rescuing us all from the financial crisis. But then how do we get at these $1,300 billion? Well, through disarmament. We need to reduce them. I don't see any reason why anyone today adds further aircraft carriers, for instance, or why pursue an arms race in space any longer. I think there are lots that could be cut here and used for peaceful purposes. But that presupposes that we lower the temperature. The missile shield is one element. I think the NATO expansion is another one. You see, people say that it's good to have sharp red lines because then both sides know how far they can go and what they can't go. But there is another way also to get peace, and that is to have areas of détente, areas in which there are no military marching up. I think of the relations between Russia and Finland. Well, they are pretty good. Sweden and Finland are not members of NATO. In my view, they should not become members. We were not members of NATO during the Cold War when Russia was dangerous in our view, and I don't see why we should join them now. And I think that relaxed relations that exist between Russia and Finland and Sweden is good. And that Russia needs to develop, I think, a policy of good neighbor. I'm not sure Russia was always a good neighbor to Georgia, and that a lot of the tension came from these relations. And Russia needs, like the United States want to talk about, the policy of the good neighbor, to have relaxed relations with them. And I think at present time, when the Western world has been so agitated about the Georgian war and often been agitated against Russia, I think it would be helpful if Russian leadership sometimes said that, look, We have no intentions to try to catch back the countries that became independent, whether Eastern Europeans or those that are parts of the Soviet Union. There's no intention for a revanchism. I think it would be useful for the Western world to hear that, because there are some people who suspect it. I don't think so. I don't think that's the Russian intention, but I think it would be useful to have it said.
Hans Blix, thank you very much for joining us.